Let's begin learning Spanish verbs with our most important verb, ser. Ser is a very well-known, but not very well-liked, woman in Joel's neighborhood in Yole. Her actual name is Sarah, but her nickname is Ser, spelled S-E-R, which is what we'll continue to call her. She's the owner of several shops in Yole, but her favorite shop is an Apple store, which she's named after herself, Ser. The name Ser is written on the front of the Apple shop above her door, but it's inscribed on a sign that's made out of a fish's fin. For some reason, this is how they always do it in Yole. A store's name is always on a fin on the front of the store. Anytime that we refer to Ser in general, we're using the name of the store, the form of the word written on the fin. Now, what does ser mean? Well, the nearest translation is to be, but that doesn't work in all situations. In English, we use to be in all kinds of situations. For example, we could say, Joel is happy to be a bee, which refers to what he is. But we can also say, he likes to be at home, which refers to where he is. He could even say that he wants to be eating soon, which has nothing to do with what he is or where he is. These are all completely different meanings in Spanish, so how do you know when to use ser? To answer this question, let's talk about the owner of the store. Ser is very eccentric, and she only allows people to shop in her Apple shop if they meet certain height requirements. She herself is a grumpy-looking lady, and she's very discriminative. Trying to go to her store is kind of like getting in line for an amusement ride. You're required to be the right height. You have to be a tall person in order to shop at Ser. Now, pay careful attention to that phrase. You have to be a tall person. So Ser doesn't care what you're doing or where you've been. She discriminates strictly based on what you are as a person. So think of ser as meaning to be in the sense of what something is. So keep picturing Sarah, this grumpy lady, measuring people's height before they can buy apples. Ser doesn't care about where or how you are. She cares about what you are. For the most part in this lesson, you won't really have to give much thought to that because every time we learn a ser word, it'll be part of a phrase. Although there will be several words to learn, you'll know how to use all of them in the sentences that I provide with each one. Now, you might wonder why we have several words to learn if we're only focused on one word, ser. Well, Ser's store is a very complicated place. It has many different areas, and each area has several words. But all of these words throughout the entire store are considered different forms of the basic word ser. To see how this works, let's begin by following Joel into the entrance of the store. Joel lives very close to Ser, but he's never successfully shopped here because he's much too short. In fact, none of Joel's friends would technically be tall enough to pass the height requirement. This has always bugged Joel because he wants to buy some of Ser's famous apple tea. But today, Joel has a plan. He calls the lizard and the pandas together, and he tells them, "We're going apple shopping today. All we have to do is convince Ser that we're actually tall people. We just need to cheat the system." After Joel whispers the details to each of his friends, they all go to Ser to try to gain admittance. Each one of them is using a particular strategy to look taller than they actually are. The 5 friends burst into the store all at once. This takes Ser by surprise, and she quickly ducks behind the checkout counter, somewhat suspiciously. Joel senses something strange about this, but he ignores it for the moment. He's focused on proving that he's tall. In order to meet the height requirements, Joel has decided that since he can fly, all he really has to do is to have something dangling down from him to look like long legs. Then, with his head up in the air since he's flying, and the things hanging down, it should look like he's a very tall person. So what Joel has done is he's tied a bunch of soybeans together. Hanging these from his legs, he almost looks convincingly tall. Joel announces loudly, "I'm a tall person." But accidentally, Joel uses the word soy because he's thinking about the soybeans. So what he actually says is, "Soy a tall person." In using the word soy, Joel means I am. Thanks to this mistake that he's made, Joel decides that he'll always say soy to mean I am when he's talking about what he is as a person. Of course, that's what soy means in Spanish. Now, Joel's plot works. Ser seems to believe Joel's story, so he's in. But what about the lizard? Ser demands, "Your friend there doesn't look tall enough." Joel looks down at the lizard, and on cue, the lizard stands up on its tail in order to appear tall enough. Lizards have a hard time with this, so the lizard's whole body is hunched over in the shape of the letter S. The lizard is unable to speak, but as you'll see throughout the rest of this course, that's not a big problem. Joel is more than capable of speaking on the lizard's behalf. So Joel says to Ser, "The lizard is a tall person." But since Joel is looking at the lizard and thinking of the letter S, it comes out a bit differently. The lizard es a tall person. The word es basically means is, but actually this word can be interpreted as he is, she is, or it is. This is because the lizard doesn't really seem to have a very specific gender. For Joel, the word es can mean any of these. So when Joel just simply says, es a tall person, this can be interpreted as he's a tall person, she's a tall person, or it's a tall person. So why don't you go ahead and practice saying this phrase a few times? Es a tall person. Now when you say this, you can be referring to any kind of person, a boy, a girl, or a lizard. So first, think of a boy and say, es a tall person, meaning he is a tall person. Now think of a girl. Es a tall person. And now you can think of something that doesn't really have a gender. Es a tall thing. It is a tall thing. Now, our next item on the agenda is the pandas. While Ser has been busy examining Joel and the lizard, the three pandas are following their part of the plan. They run over to the window and climb up on top of a few jugs of apple juice. Now their heads are partially blocking the sun that's streaming through the window, and with the light behind them, all that can be seen of them is shadows or silhouettes of their heads. Ser looks over in the panda's direction, and the sun is in her eyes, so she can't see them very well. But from her perspective, they now look like tall people. To attest to this, Joel declares, "They're tall people." But instead of saying they are, he's thinking of the sun that's streaming through the window, so here's what he says when he refers to the pandas. Son tall people. So the word S-O-N is pronounced son, and it means they are. Now let's pause for a second. There are three basic phrases that we've learned so far. Soy, a tall person. Es, a tall person. And son, tall people. If you can remember all three of these phrases while thinking of the different people in this scene, you're ready to learn two more words here. Now that Joel, the lizard, and the pandas are all in the store, they're in luck. They can go ahead and buy whatever they want. However, there's something nagging at Joel. When they first walked into the store, Ser ducked behind the counter in a hasty, almost panicked rush. Not only that, but there's a strange image lingering in the air. Green streaks are floating by that look a lot like air rays. Now this needs a little bit of explanation. In the planet of Yol, one of the most significant recent advancements is hovercraft technology. Hovercrafts here use blowing air, but the air turns a bit green when the machine is moving quickly, creating the look of something called air rays going behind the aircraft. Joel finds this situation very odd. He thought that Ser was a tall, proud person. But when customers are around, She seems to spend all day standing behind the counter. Maybe she's actually using a hovercraft, in which case she may not be as tall as she pretends to be. In his doubt, Joel asks, "You are a tall person, aren't you?" But since he's thinking of the air rays, it comes out like this. ¿Eres a tall person? The word eres means you are. So eres a tall person means either you are a tall person or the question, are you a tall person? Now note that eres has two syllables. The stressed syllable is the first one, which sounds kind of like air. So when you want to say you are a tall person, remember that you're stressing the first syllable. Eres a tall person. Before ser can respond, there's a loud noise. Splat! One of the apple jugs that the pandas were standing on has collapsed. The panda who was standing on it falls down, landing in a puddle of sticky apple juice. Ser is furious when she realizes that she's been tricked. These cheaters are disobeying the height requirement. "What are you doing in here?" she yells, looking around the room. "You aren't really tall enough. You're just tricking me." This makes Joel a bit upset. Why should she blame all of them for one panda's mistake? Don't the rest of them still look tall? Or at least some of them? So Joel retorts, "What are you talking about? We're tall people." But since he's privately thinking, "some of us," it comes out like this. Somos tall people. So somos means we are, and it sounds kind of like some of us. Remember to stress the syllable that is S-O-M, so it's somos. Now before moving on, make sure you can remember the stories associated with each of these words, and practice saying these phrases one by one. Remember that Joel represents I, the lizard represents he, she, or it, the pandas represent they, ser represents you, and all of them together represents us. So, I am a tall person is soy a tall person. It is a tall person, or he or she is a tall person, would be es a tall person. They are tall people is son tall people. And then you are a tall person refers to Sarah, the storekeeper, so it's eres a tall person. And then finally, for we are tall people, remember that Joel says some of us, so it's somos tall people. In the next video, we'll explore some more phrases that use all of these words, as well as several more forms of the verb ser, such as the past and future tenses. But first, let's address a commonly asked question. Why did we use different people for each of these words? The lizard for it is, the pandas for they are, and so on. Well, this is a very carefully planned mnemonic strategy that we'll continue to use every time we learn new verb forms. You've already seen that the word ser seems to be very complicated with the several different versions that we've learned. But believe it or not, we've just begun to scratch the surface of this complex verb. Although we've covered the 5 forms of the present tense, we have about 10 to 15 more forms to learn in this lesson, including not just the past and future, but the subjunctive and more. That's quite a lot to learn. But Joel never gets these different forms confused. He always knows what to use in any situation because he knows who is who. When he's talking about one other person, he, she, or it, he always thinks of the lizard. When he's talking about multiple people, they, he thinks of the pandas. To talk to one person, you, he thinks of Sarah. And when talking about himself, I, of course he thinks of himself. So these different words are never confusing for him. As we learn more forms of ser, we'll continue to use the lizard for he, she, or it, Sarah for you, the pandas for they, and so on. So even though we have a lot of forms to learn, you'll know how to organize it in your head. Anytime you want to think of the present tense, Well, you've already learned it now. It's here at the entrance of the store. All of the words that we've learned here are in the present tense for things that are true right now. But if we move all of these people to a different area, we can learn a different tense. For example, when we go to the checkout counter, we'll learn the past tense for each of these people. This is Joel's secret to never getting Sarah's forms confused. Every time that he needs to say that someone is something or was something, he first thinks of a particular area in Sarah's store. So if it's something that's true right now for the present tense, he thinks about the entrance of the store and all the words that we just learned. Now, the next thing he does after that is he thinks of the person that he's referring to. Now, let's say that we're wanting to say they are something. That's true in the present tense, so we go to the entrance of the store. Now, the correct person would be the pandas. Based on what we've seen of the pandas in our story, Joel is able to think of the appropriate form of the verb, the word son, because the pandas are standing in the sun. So he'll say, son, tall people. But if he's thinking of a different person, maybe you for you are, he would just think about our story with Sarah, who has the air rays. So it would be, eres a tall person. Notice that we're following the same principle that we did previously in Lesson 1 when we were in the countryside. Remember the phrase, lo you found, to mean I found him? We were able to switch out the lo there for other words in the same scene. To say you found me would be me you found. And to say you found her, it would be la you found. We know that lo, la, and me all work the same way because we found them in the same area, on the hill under the tree. So if you just think of the correct person in the scene, you can think of the appropriate word. But of course, you want to make sure you're in the right place first. So far, everything that we've learned is in the entrance of the store, which means that they all happen in the present tense. In the next video, we'll begin going to other areas of the store to learn the past tense, the future tense, and so on.